Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on the fascinating world of near-death experiences, spirit communication, and all things metaphysical and spiritual. The mission of this project is to share messages of hope and inspiration with others, and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. Thank you for being here with an open heart and mind. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, Magic is Real listeners and watchers. I'm Shannon Torrance, and you're listening to Magic is Real. If you're new here, this is a podcast where we talk about spiritually transformative experiences, near-death experiences, shared-death experiences, and spiritual journeys in general. Today, I have with me Rosemary Thornton. She is the author of the book, and I'm going to have to read it because I don't want to botch the title, Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. Rosemary is a near-death experiencer and a beautiful person. And I welcome you, Rosemary. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I am so glad to have you. Now, Rosemary, yours has been described as, a lot of people are saying yours is one of the most profound near-death experience stories they've ever heard. And I think that we do need to go back in time a little bit, because I think it informs your near-death experience. And I'd love to know how you grew up, what your life was like, what your maybe religious or spiritual attitudes may have been, anything about you that defines you as a human being, and what made you you.
Well, that's a big question.
Yes.
I've been asked a lot of questions, but I don't think I ever got that one. Well, the Reader's Digest version, even as a child, I felt very different. I know every kid feels different, but I would call it the angel voices. I would hear the voices of angels, and I realized, I guess I was 8 or 9, maybe even younger, that I realized that everyone didn't hear the angel voices. And I guess it's what we'd call just the still small voice that says, go this way, not that way. And I heard them, and I wasn't even trying. I just heard them as a consequence of being alive. And I remember like knowing somebody had passed on before there was even a known announcement, because I would hear them whisper goodbye, or I'd see them, or I'd smell them. And other people weren't experiencing that. And in fact, jumping ahead a bit to this, which I prefer to call a temporary death experience I had in September 2018, because I wasn't near death. I am a wordsmith. I have 30 years experience as a writer, newspaper reporter, magazine writer, editor. I've done it all. I've written now 10 books. My first 9 were on architectural history. So this is kind of a departure from my genre to write about dying. But when I was in the midst of my temporary death experience, I realized I had been in that space before, and I asked one of the angelic beings with me, I've been here before, haven't I? And the angel said, remember, your mom told you a story that as an infant you were given up for dead as a newborn. And then I came back to life. And the angel said, turns out you weren't close to death, that you actually crossed over and you were sent back then. So I don't know if that was what made me different. And also, the reason it's believed the reason I came back, I had been pretty much given up for dead, is my mother and a church friend prayed for me for hours and hours. And even though my death had been expected to be imminent, I was not only better, but I was completely healed. And so, I was a brand new baby. So it was a big deal. So I had always thought maybe all that prayer was the reason I could hear the angels. And yet, I think maybe it's a combination of things. So my background would be growing up with that understanding. My father tried to use it as a parlor trick. He tried to teach me how to be telepathic. And he would say, you're one of those people that does not need spoken communication. You can learn how to communicate with people telepathically. And he would practice with me when my mother was away. And when mom found out, she said, we're not doing this. And then when I was 14, my father abandoned the family. It was just me and my mom at that point. And those were very hard years. So I heard a man who survived the Spanish flu epidemic from 1918. He was 5 years old when the Spanish flu came through, and it took his mother So when he was 5, he lost his mom, and he said, I love this quote. He said, "The shine went off the world at 5 years old." And I thought that was a beautiful quote. And that's how I felt when my dad walked out, wanted nothing to do with me, nothing to do with my mother. The shine went off the world when I was 14. I took a couple jobs to figure out how to keep things together. So anyway, those were hard years. Had a marriage that lasted 24 years, had 3 beautiful daughters. And then that marriage ended in divorce after 24 years. And I waited about 5 years. And, during those years as a single person is when I got into this gig of writing books about architectural history, specifically the old Sears kit homes from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. And I started that in 2002. And those books did well. Those books got me on the second episode of History Detectives on PBS. I
Wow.
I was on all kinds of network programs. I was in newspapers and even made it to BBC Radio. And so the single years were pretty productive for me. And then I met my second husband when I was, I guess, mid 40s, and we were married 10 years. And then I really thought he was the love of my life. He was I don't know, he was quirky and goofy and extremely eccentric and incredibly intelligent. Probably had an IQ north of 180. And we would go to bed at night and we would read books to each other, or sometimes we would just read to ourselves. But we talked about the books we read, and we thoroughly enjoyed all kinds of, I don't know, intellectual, goofy, nerdy things. And, one of the most common questions I get asked was, did you have any signs before he killed himself? Were there any warning signs? And I had always been very intuitive, and I had adapted the habit of praying for him at least twice a day, every morning and every evening. And I knew that he was an answer. I thought he was an answer to a lifetime of prayer. After you have hard times from age 14 on, you're kind of looking for things to go back to being simple one day. And so when I met this man in my mid 40s, I thought we'd finally gotten back to things being good and easy and peaceful. And after 10 years, he ended his life at our home. And my life was just in a tailspin, just in such a tailspin. And we were talking before we went on about, my story's been heard by 12 million people, which is a lot. And a lot of them are on different podcasts on YouTube, and I do read the comments. And somebody just put a comment up the other day that my story didn't make sense. That how did I go from living in a house to living out of my car? And I thought, wait a second, you're disparaging and discounting my story because I went from living in a house to living in a car. And again, it's just kind of a sign. There's not an understanding of how people end up in straitened circumstances. In my case, it was that I had a psychotic break. I've always been a very sensitive soul. And I had prayed for this man. And to whom do you turn when you feel like God has made a joke of your prayers? Where do you go? I had nowhere to go. And the friends, my husband was successful and sophisticated and fun and funny. And we'd have yard parties and have all kinds of nice, fancy folks show up. And after this, they all scattered. They scattered very dramatically and very suddenly. And the people who stepped into the fray to save me, literally to save me, were the people who had been on the periphery of my life, the people on the outer edges. And they were people that you would describe as very solid working class. These were not the wealthy people, the elitists, the fancy folks, let's say. And there was two people in particular. There were a lot of people, but two people in particular. One woman, very dear friend, she found out that I had taken to sleeping in my car. And it wasn't that I didn't have a house, but my house was the place that this thing happened. I couldn't go back to that house. I could go in it, but I couldn't spend the night there. And very kind folks invited me into their home, trying to help me and save me. But I would, to be blunt, my need was too great for their intentions. And I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, and it was a bad scene. I'd wake up at night and wander the house. I couldn't eat. I lost a tremendous amount of weight. So this woman, that's how I came to be living in my car. It was very comfortable. It was a Camry. They have really comfortable seats,
Yeah.
So, and it felt peaceful. It felt like my own, what's the word? Cocoon. that I was in control of this space. Nobody could mess with me. And if I screamed, it was okay. If I screamed, I could turn on the radio and listen to nice music. So it certainly gave me an understanding of how people become homeless. Boy, did it give me a crash course on that. And anyway, my friend found out I was doing that, and she said, I don't want you sleeping in that car anymore. You're coming with me. And I said, nope, 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 nope. Been there, done that. I said, I scream. I disturb the whole household. I make the dogs bark. You don't want me in your home. She said, look, I've known you for a while. I like having you as a friend. You're going to stay with me. And I said, no, 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 no. The woman you knew before this, she's dead. She's gone. So stop thinking it's going to be a visit with Rosemary, because it's not. I'm out of my mind, and I can't hide it. I can't pretend 24 hours a day to not be out of my mind. I can pretend for maybe 15 minutes, but I can't pretend for a day. But anyway, she said, no, come home with me. And she said God had put it on her heart to do this. And I mean, how do you argue with that? And what
Right.
she said, she's very motherly, and she did use, she used her I'm the mother voice, and that's that. So I did. She said, we're going to do it for one night. And that was brilliant. That was absolutely inspired. So I thought, one night I can do this for her. Well, one night, the next morning, I woke up and she said, do you think you'd like to try that again tonight? And I said, okay. And this went on for 4 months. She did save me. And then the thing is, she would work very long, hard hours. And at night, she would come into her own spare bedroom where I was sleeping or trying to sleep in the bed, and she would stand at the foot of the bed and pray for me. And I asked her, later, years later, I said, why did you do that? And she said, well, I loved you, for one. And two, she said, when I would come into the house or even your room, I would hear you moaning and groaning and writhing in your sleep. And she said, when I would stand at the foot of that bed and pray for you, you would calm down. Your breathing would relax. You would stop thrashing in the bed, and you would quiet into a more settled sleep. And I thought, that is a real Jesus move. Seriously, that's what we're supposed to be doing for each other. One of my favorite stories, St. John, the disciple that lived the longest, um, he was asked at the end of his life, people say, you walked with Jesus, you talked with Jesus. What was it like to be with Jesus? And they wanted to know everything about it. And he would only tell them one sentence, and it was 5 words. But he said the whole of what he had learned from walking the earth with Jesus was this one sentence that he shared with everybody, which is, little children, love one another. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be loving each other. And sometimes it looks like a realtor that was on the periphery of your life that shows up and says, come stay in my house. And I did that for 4 months, and I moved out and moved in with a friend. And the friend took care of me for 2 years. And by take care of, I mean, he made sure I ate occasionally. I had a dog. I was reunited with my dog, and I didn't even have it in me to take care of the dog except to take her for walks. I liked taking her for walks. In fact, in my book that you mentioned, Remembering the Light, I have a chapter devoted to Teddy the dog, because he did this. My husband killed himself in front of this dog. She was a Sheltie, like an apartment-sized lassie. And he did this in front of the dog, and the dog was never the same again. The dog had a lot of anxiety issues. She had a lot of problems. She had tried to lick him back to life after he did this, and the dog had to be taken away and cleaned up before I could see her. So we'd all been through a lot. It doesn't really begin to describe it. So for 29 months, I was pretty much a mess. And I could pretend, I could mask. By the way, the word personality, do you know the Latin word for that? I think it's persona, but the Latin word for that is mask. And that's what so many of us do. We put on a mask and pretend to be happy and everything's fine. So at 29 months, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I just couldn't believe it. I was like, man, where's this going? What's the plan? I love a plan. And the thing of it was, every night I had prayed, in these 29 months between my husband's suicide and my own diagnosis of cancer, I had prayed every night for 3 things. One, I said, God, either heal me or let me die, because I knew I couldn't stand this existence another minute. My second prayer was, I asked to be spared a life of you. I knew I would be dead soon. I just knew it. You know how you have a knowing? I
Mm-hmm.
knew I'd be gone soon. And I had had recurring nightmares about his death and the violence involved in it and all that. And I had these recurring dreams that I got to him just before he did it. I had nightmares I got to him just after he did it. I had nightmares where I begged him not to do it. And so I told God, I said, I don't want to see this again. So please, no life review. And my third prayer was, I can't handle any more big decisions. And I couldn't. My decisions, my ability to talk about decision fatigue. So those were my 3 nightly prayers. So 29 months after his death, I get this diagnosis. I mean, there had been a lot of symptoms and a lot of physical problems. And I had gone to a doctor because there were problems, and it was stage 2 cervical cancer. And I literally looked up at God and thought, asked out loud, what are we doing? You know, I said, let me die, let me go, heal me or let me go. I didn't say slowly. I guess I should have said fast, let it end fast. But I had planned, I had a very detailed plan on how to end my life. And I thought about it a lot. Boy, did I think about it in those 29 months. Because when the smartest man you've ever met does this, you do kind of get to thinking, maybe this is what we should do. And it's not, but, and it was actually a surgery to see how far the cancer had spread that went wrong. And, the oncologist who did the surgery sent me home too soon. Actually, it was an RN attending me, and I told him I was bleeding profusely. They sent me home, a very poor choice. At home, I realized I was still bleeding a lot, and I stepped into my shower at home because I had really pretty carpet. I didn't want to mess up my light-colored carpet, and nothing is a bigger housekeeping nightmare than bleeding to death. So,
That's right.
so I was in the shower, and I thought, this may be an answer to my prayers. In fact, I thought about one of my Bible verses somebody had read to me early on was First Corinthians 10:13, which is God will show you a way out. And I thought, oh my gosh, maybe this bleeding out from this surgery, a botched surgery, maybe this is an answer to those prayers. I thought I can just sit down on the floor of my shower. I'll be gone in minutes. Once you sit down, it won't be long, and I won't be able to get back up. Seemed like a pretty cool idea. And I thought about it, and I thought, those 2 people brought me home from the hospital, and they were in the living room, and I thought it's really fair for them to come in here and see that mess. And I thought, well, I don't know. But I did feel for them that, and one of the people in the living room was the fellow who had taken care of me for 2 years. Man, he's got 2 years invested in this. So I got myself out of that shower, wrapped myself up in some towels, and went out to the foyer of my house because it had hardwood floors, and I knew if I bled on the hardwood floors, it wouldn't make a mess.
The things we're thinking about when we're dying.
I know. So an ambulance was summoned, took me to a nearby emergency room, and they made some more poor choices. And again, they did not take me seriously. And an interesting aside, I guess I better look up the statistic, but years ago, as a proportion, more women died from cardiac events in hospitals than men, as a proportion, because women are told it's tension, it's stress, it's a panic attack. Just go home, you'll be fine. But you need to calm down. You can't let yourself get this excited. So we still tend to be kind of dismissive with women, and I think that's what happened with me. I said, I'm bleeding to death. And they were like, oh, you'll be fine. So they stuffed me with gauze like Christmas goose and packed me, and then hooked me up to a blood pressure monitor and a pulse ox on my index finger, and away the doctor and nurse went. But one thing I should add, the nurse was by my side as I'm laying on the gurney in this little cubicle in the ER, and I was pretty upset because I thought, let's get this show on the road. I don't want to die now. I'm here in a hospital. Let's do this thing. So I said, promise me you're not going to let me die. And she said, oh, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die. And then they walked out of she gave me a shot of Dilaudid. And, I've given this talk a few times in front of an audience, like a live audience. And it's always fun when I tell them that, I was bleeding to death and they gave me a shot of Dilaudid. All the medical personnel in the audience go, oh, because it's contraindicated for plunging blood pressure, and it pretty much greased the skids to the afterlife. You're like, all righty, the heart's down a few pints. Let's put a little, because Dilaudid is a morphine derivative, so it can depress breathing and heart rate. So I don't think I had that Dilaudid in me very long when I just went bye-bye. And the last thing I remember was looking at my friend. Again, my friend had come with me to the ER, looking at my friend and saying, man, that's some good stuff.
Yeah. Were you in a bed in a room at this point? Okay.
Yes, I was in a
Yeah.
cubicle in an ER.
Oh, right.
And my friend said that I, passed out pretty quick and that, and see, I don't know what the doctor and nurse were doing. They were not in the room at this point. You'd think they'd be summoning an ambulance to get me to a trauma center, doing something, but I was just stretched out on this gurney in this little ER cubicle. And this ER was not connected to a hospital. They were just like a upgraded now care place, I guess. I don't know. So, my friend said he was watching the blood pressure monitor, and at one point, he said he glanced up at it and it said 32 over 25, which is pretty much
Wow.
dead. Yeah. The cool thing is, at that point, I opened my eyes. He said, you tried to sit up on the gurney. He said, your eyes popped open. You reached up to heaven. He said, you reached way, way up and you talked to somebody only, I talked to somebody only I could see. And there's a term for that now. Apparently, at the end of life, we tend to have a burst of energy, and it's called terminal lucidity, and it's very common. So after that, my eyes shut and I flopped back on the gurney. And he said my blood pressure went to error, which meant it was lower than 32 over 25. And that's when I really think my soul left when I flopped back on that gurney. I don't know when my vitals ended in relation to that. But at some point after that, when the blood pressure read error, is what set off an alarm, and the nurse came running. Uh, and he was shooed out into the hallway while they got out, the stuff they do when your heart is stopped. Meanwhile, I was having a great time. The last thing I remember on this earth was saying, wow, or man, that's some good stuff. And then the next thing I remember is being awakened from a deep dreamless state and being catapulted out of my body. And I mean catapulted. It was extremely dramatic. It was dramatic almost to the point of being jarring, but it wasn't jarring. But I knew instantly what was going on. And I was just moving away from my body in a blackness. And a lot of people say, well, did you see your body? I did not. I was floating away in this very, very comfortable and comforting, actively comforting blackness. I've heard another person describe it as velvety, and that's a very good description. It was like it was around me and comforting me like a mother's love. It was quite a thing. And as I'm floating away, I think my very first thought was my heart has stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And that was affirmed later by the doctor the next day at the hospital. But then my next thought was, I'm dying. And then I thought, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. Because, when you're going on to your reward, the most important thing is correcting your grammar. And
That would be me, and it will be.
and
Yeah.
I thought it was really funny that here I am, literally dead, and yet having had a dog for at this point, I guess 11 years or 10 years, I talk to myself, I talk to the dog, I talk out loud. I get the thoughts out of my head by talking out loud a lot. And so I was saying all this out loud in this new experience. And I thought, okay, when I said I'm not dying, I'm dead, I thought that's pretty funny. And I laughed out loud and I heard myself giggle. And I thought, wow, everything I am has gone with me. My goofball sense of humor, maybe moribund sense of humor, my funny little giggle. And I thought, I don't have breath sounds. I'm pretty sure I don't have vocal cords. So I don't think I have lungs. And yet I'm producing sound and I'm hearing sound just as I always have in my 59 years in this body. Wow. So, we hear people say there is no death. There's no such thing as death. They're right. And for the people left behind, it's a very different experience. They'd be experiencing loss and grief and sadness and no chats anymore, no breakfast dates. But for the person having the experience, I believe with my whole heart, there is no death. Everything I was went with me. And the fact that I could hear myself talk, and there were so many thoughts that came to memory. I remember thinking I had already been scheduled to start once a week chemotherapy and daily radiation for 6 weeks. And they said there was a 70% chance that the first round of chemo would wipe it out. And if it didn't, I'd have to do a second course of chemo and on and on and on. So I remember thinking, I'm out. That's not my problem anymore. You know, I got away clean. And then the other thing I thought about is I didn't do this to myself. I had been so engaged in suicidal thoughts. And what stopped me was knowing how much damage it could do to those who loved me. That's what stopped me. But I was running out of willpower. I was running out of road to keep from doing this because my life was frankly miserable. So as I'm floating away from my body, I even thought about my husband's suicide. And I thought that I didn't do that. That it will be said that I sought medical care. I sought treatment. And it was a medical mistake that took me out. And I thought, this is all great. This is so good. But my point is I had all those memories of what was going to happen and what had happened. I even remembered my husband's suicide. And it just was so affirming that everything we are goes with us. And I thought, what did I leave on that gurney back in that little ER? And I thought I left behind sadness, regret, guilt, woe, panic, worry, PTSD, anxiety. That's what I left. And then I thought, I've always wondered what Rosemary the writer, Rosemary the woman would look like without the worries, the woe, the anxiety, the stress, all of it. And I thought, I feel great. I'm pretty cool when I don't have any anxiety. This is really wonderful.
Yeah.
And it was such a awareness. And it wasn't that I was thinking this thought and then this thought and then that thought. It's like the thoughts were everywhere at every time. And this is one of my favorite quotes, but Einstein said, to those of us who are committed physicists, the past, present, and future are only illusion, however persistent. In the human experience, we think of time as a very linear construct, but in this experience, I was gone for more than 10 minutes to Earth time, I guess, in terms of how we express things. But if you told me I'd been gone for days, I would have believed it. So this experience, it was happening everywhere, and that was the point, going back to what I said earlier, the floating in this blackness, where I said to an angel, I felt very, although I couldn't see, I knew people were with me, and they were people that knew me. They were so familiar. It was just, there's a song, I love this song, but it's going home, I'm just going home. That's what I was doing. These people that were with me in this experience, and people's the wrong word, but these beings knew me. They'd known me forever. And it was so comforting to be with them. They were angels, I think. So that's when I asked one of the angels that was accompanying me on this journey. I said, I've been here before, like, in this 59-year experience. And they said, yeah, when you were that itty bitty baby and things went south and you got so sick, you crossed over, and yet we sent you back then. So that's why it feels so familiar to me. And I remember thinking that would have been great to know back then, back on Earth, all the weirdness, all kids making fun of me. Kids are terrible. People say, I wish I could go back to high school. No, that's what hell is. Hell is high school for a sensitive soul. And if you happen to be a little smarter than the average bear and you like learning, oh man, you're in extra trouble. So yeah, the kids in high school were brutal to me. Kids are kids, I had a
Yeah.
few friends,
I
but
had to do a lot of therapy to unwind the damage that was done by toddlers that said horrible things to me. And I didn't know that they were just babies. So yes, I'm literally just learned to love myself in the last decade after a lifetime of self-loathing that came from little kids saying you're ugly and me believing it for the rest of my life.
oh my gosh. And you're
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
That's all I ever heard is you're a weirdo. Why are you so weird? I got nothing. I'm weird.
I
Okay.
know.
Hit me again. Stuff me in a locker. Lock
Yep.
me in the bathroom stall again. Whatever you want. But yeah, I agree with you. I am
Yeah.
weird.
And now you're
Next.
adding insult to injury. Thank you.
I
I'm
know.
weird. And then I'm also bullied. Thank you.
I think that's why we were talking before about some of the comments on YouTube are so bad. And I was like, wait a
Horrible.
second. But yeah, I hear, to be honest, probably 95% of the comments are absolutely lovely. But I get
Yeah.
I get the ones that aren't so nice
It's all
too.
projection and fear and them feeling bad about themselves and needing to put down somebody else to make themselves feel less bad about themselves. And it's all just a projection, but
But I
it
have a feeling
hurts
it does, and I have a feeling they've been doing it a long
a long
time.
time. I try to be compassionate, but even now I'm like, what? I still find myself getting hurt. And I'm like, Shannon, do not give this attention. But it's hard. It's hard.
It is. And I anyway, so yeah, so it was lovely to have the angel explain to me that I had been here before, and that's why I was a little bit different. And I did say pretty much good to know, but that would have been more useful back there. But that's
Although, what would you
okay.
have done? Told the kids, "You guys, it's because I'm a divine being of light." I mean, because I get that I'm a soul in a human body. I think that would have maybe taken the bullying to a whole new level. So maybe better you
Well,
didn't know.
to add insult to injury, I have always had a passion for cars and houses. And the books I wrote were because I love houses. I mean, by the grace of God, I got into a vocation writing about houses. I've always loved everything about houses. I remember just being a kid, like second grade, maybe third, and you're out on the playground for recess, and some of the kids go off to the slide, and some go off to the swing set, and some go off to play baseball. There was a house being built across the street from the playground, and I would go just cling to the chain link fence, get as close to that house as I could. And I was amazed that there were no other kids with me because I'd say, look, they're laying those big blocks. They're laying the cinder blocks. Oh, look, they're getting ready to put up the vertical wall members, but the studs are, but I would say, don't you want to see this? And so every day for about 3 months, I would run over and watch this house being built. And the kids were like, yeah. So my
Bless.
point is it added to the weirdness.
Yeah, you were just a little adult, and you were just a little adult in a tiny body.
Enjoying construction.
I mean,
I think it's amazing.
I
And I
know.
couldn't believe these. I thought those kids were weird. I thought those kids were seriously weird because they're off at the slide. Hey, you know what? That slide looks the same it did last week. Nothing's going to change about that slide, but look at this house. Every day we come out here, this house has changed significantly. Look at these men. They wear their tools on their belts. They climb up on the roof. That looks like a pretty steep roof. How are they staying up there? But anyway, yeah, so it
Yeah,
was
but you were an old soul, and kids don't get that.
they don't.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yes, in this experience, finding out that I had died and been sent back was, I thought, okay, explains a lot,
Yeah.
great. And then one of the things that happened very early on, still floating away from my body, is I sensed the presence of a massive spiritual being. I mean, massive. And she was, that's, by the way, the YouTube comments always give me, anytime I use a feminine pronoun to describe angels, spiritual beings, or a deity, I get slammed. Somebody in
Right.
the comments said, don't read her book. She used the pronoun she with God one time. And I'm like, okay. Because the thing is, the Bible uses the term mother to express God in several places. What is it? As an eagle fluttereth up her nest, so shall God watch over you, or something. I mean, there are a lot of references to God as mother, or a handful certainly. So this presence I perceive to have been feminine, masculine, both. I don't know. And does it matter? Do we really need to ask what sex God is? But anyway, and my father had not been kind. He was not a nice man. When I hit 14, he went bye-bye. And so when I thought of God, even throughout my life, when I thought of God as mother, I could get behind that because
Yeah.
my mom really loved me, and my mom was good to me, and she was kind to me. And my dad was so mean to me, and then he abandoned me. So when I thought of God as father, I would always think, man, I don't want any part of that. If
Yeah.
God's like father, ugh. So these people who criticize me for using God as a mother presence, I don't get it. But yeah, like I said, people like to pick without a good reason. So this massive spiritual presence was to my left, and I remember I looked up and a little bit behind me to see, and I'm in blackness, so I can't see. But she was huge. And I made a note of the fact that I was looking over my left shoulder. I thought, I'm turning my head to look over my left shoulder, so I still have something of a human form. I thought that's pretty cool. And so I said, literally, with a lilt in my voice, I said to this being, this massive being, I said, and who are you? And the answer was immediate. Before I could even finish the question, the answer was, you, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. I was like, oh man, that's Genesis 1:26 and 27, that we're made in the image and likeness of God. And again, I thought, that's my favorite Bible verse. And it came with more than just the words, it came with an infusion of knowing. And I thought, that's so amazing. I've studied it. I've looked it up in every Bible commentary I could find. I've read it in every Bible interpretation I could find. Now I get it. There's an original, and I'm the image and likeness. And I was like, wow, wow. I mean, it was really a wow moment. While I'm still in the wow moment, so much more is happening. And one of the thoughts that was very succinct to me was still floating in this black. I mean, I'm a type A person. When somebody else drives the car, I'm like, I think you need to be in the left lane here. You should speed up. You should slow down. You're tailgating. I need you to be way over here. You're getting me nervous. Can we go a little faster? Can we go a little slower? And I'm floating. And I'm not asking any questions. I'm like, oh, this is fun. This is great. Floating is great. So, and I guess I knew I was in God's care. I knew I was being, again, that familiarity. These people knew me. They liked me. They knew that I was kind of, what's the word we use? Unique and rare. And they loved me just as I am, and they liked me just as I am. It was so familiar. It was so pleasant. It's like real family, not the kind of family that hurts, but real family and eternal family, of which our human family should be an example. Anyway, uh, this thing that I was the image and likeness. Oh, what I was going to say is a Bible verse that came to me. Paul wrote, he talked about the peace that passeth all understanding. And that Bible verse came very clearly to my thought. And I thought, this is peace. Nobody can understand how much peace this is. But this is the peace Paul talked about. And, they believe Paul had a near-death experience. He was stoned to death. Oh, I should know where. But he was stoned to death and lowered over the wall. And then later he talks about, I knew a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. He was speaking in third person, but scholars believe Paul was talking about himself. So when Paul talked about the peace that passeth all understanding, he was talking about this peace, this divine peace. So this experience went on and on. Really felt like it went on for quite some time. And then I don't remember the transition, but I ended up in a white room. And this time I was standing on my own 2 feet. And as a longtime writer, I'm really angry at myself that I didn't look at my feet. I mean, what did my feet look like? Was I wearing shoes? Was I wearing the shoes I'd had when I walked into the hospital? Because they were my favorite little red flip-flops with flowers on them. They were really cute. What was I wearing? Did I have feet? Did I have legs? But I felt like I had something approximating legs, and I didn't look. But I saw a door ahead of me, and I thought to myself, I don't know if I have legs. I don't know the mechanism of all this, but I know that I can move with intention. So I had an intention to move toward that door, because throughout my life, this is another curious thing, ever since Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, came out in the mid-'70s, little trade paperback, I had read that book till I memorized it. And then I read all the NDE books I could get my hands on. I read them again and again and again and again and again. And now it makes more sense. Having been through this experience as an infant, I wanted to know everything. I want to know everything. So I saw that door, and I knew what that door was. The door was the line of demarcation. I pretty much told the angels, out of my way, we're doing the door. And, but in this room, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything was perfect white, bright, 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 luminescent, iridescent white. And there were no light fixtures. The white was producing its own light. And it was such a pure and perfect white. And within this room, there was a fog or a mist. And as I walked forward to get toward that door, because there was no question in my mind, I wanted to go. I knew what was waiting for me on earth. I didn't want to go back to that. And you can't want to go back to that after you've lived in hell for 29 months. I had lost my friends. I'd lost my sanity. I had a book come out right before my husband's suicide. It was a book I had spent 6 years writing. It was a wonderful book, and it just fell off a cliff. I had been invited to do a couple interviews about that book, and I couldn't. I had spent 20 years as a professional writer and public speaker. And when I tried to do an interview about that book, I failed. I got the shakes. I couldn't get my words out. I was a mess. So I didn't want to go back to any of that. And the sadness of friends who had deserted me, and the sadness of knowing that I wasn't the person that I had been, and the weariness from trying to be somebody I wasn't. The weariness of when people say, "Hey, Rosemary, how you doing?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm doing great. Everything's just fine." And then thinking inside, "Well, you certainly have become accomplished at pretending, haven't you?" And I felt like I should get an Oscar for my performances in the world. And something I mentioned in my book, I got all my nerve up, and this was hard to do, but I went to a local coffee shop and just sat there looking out the window. And something about people with PTSD is you tend to sit by doors. You like to be able to see what's coming and going, and you like to be able to get away if you need to. Well, I had my head down in my soup or my coffee or whatever, and the wind caught that door and it slammed very hard and it was very loud. And this, was in that 29 months before my own NDE. And it made a tremendous sound as the wind shut it. And I jumped up to the point of spilling the liquid, whatever it was, and I said very loudly in a crowded coffee shop, I said, "What the F is wrong with you?" And I thought it was a gunshot, I thought it was something very bad happening. And I said those words before I could even think. And then people looked at me and gasped and gawked, and I just grabbed my purse and ran out the door. So even going out to eat was very hard. And actually, after that happened, I didn't do that again. So I didn't want to go back to that. So when I'm in this white room and I see that door in front of me, I'm like, this is good. And I thought about that thing. I got out. In fact, true story, people laugh at this, but it's the truth. I felt like I had been granted early release for good behavior. I've heard a theory that I really appreciate. They say sometimes, I don't know, I don't know if it's true, but sometimes we are given an exit when life gets too hard. And I think this was my exit. I think it was my opportunity because I couldn't face life. And also, I think when you pray every night that God will either heal you or let you die, I think those prayers are heard. I've talked about this elsewhere. We get all complicated in meditation and meditative work. I think sometimes just prayers of petition. Just talk to your angels. Just talk to God. Say, this is what I need. I need help. Help me. I think those are very powerful prayers. So in this white room, there was this white mist falling around me and very actively falling. And I looked and it was swirling. It was moving around me. And I asked the angels, I said, what is this? And they said, actually, I tried to focus on an individual droplet, which sounds nuts, but I felt like I ought to be able to see an individual droplet. And the angel said, what you're looking at is particles of light. And that before you go to heaven, you have to have the earth's muck removed from you. And as somebody said, leave your muddy boots at the door. And I just love that. That it was explained to me that some people die with a disease process or even a sin so heavily imprinted on their soul that they think it's part of them. And the purpose of this white room is to restore us to our innate spiritual perfection and to get that stuff away, the muck off of us. And it was the best description I can come up with is it's akin to a spiritual car wash. And so it was about 15 feet to get to this door. And a message that was conveyed to me, and I can't say how, but a message was made very clear was if I agreed to go back, I would be restored to wholeness. And it wasn't that you'll be healed of this thing and that thing and this good thing will happen, but it was very simple that I would be restored to wholeness. And I don't really know that I made a decision about that. I said, oh, yeah. But then I got to that door and I put my right hand up to push through it and I paused and I said, is this the divine will for my life? And people, maybe they don't understand that. It's not that, I don't know, when you're in that place, all you want to do is the will of God, you know? And so it was very natural to say, is this the divine will for my life? And I couldn't even finish the question. And the answer was no, it's not. But the answer was whatever you decide, you go with all of God's blessings and mercy and care and grace and love. And I thought, I'll take that deal. And I went to push through the door, which I was a little miffed that it was closed. And I had a vision of that nurse. And it was a very powerful vision. It was almost like I was momentarily transported to a place and in a room with her. and she was in a hospital supply room. And she was sitting on a little metal stool surrounded by linens and supplies that you'd see in a hospital. And she was leaning forward with her head in her hands, and she was sobbing uncontrollably. And in this vision, I saw her, through tears, say, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die. And I lost her. And I was like, oh, come on. Don't do this to me. I need to go. Besides, she's a nurse. She's about my age. She's getting ready to retire probably. She's seen him die. She'll get over it. But then I didn't just see this. I felt her grief. And it was very powerful. That's an understatement. I recognize it as the deep grief, well beyond normal grief. And I felt it right here, And I realized, actually, I remember thinking, if I can spare one person that much sadness, I have to go back. And boy, oh boy, that wasn't an easy thing to think about. I've always kept a daily gratitude list of things, 5 things every day. I write down 5 things I'm grateful for. And my thought in this experience throughout the blackness and in the white room was, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. Actually, being a writer, I even thought to myself, I always wondered how I would die. Now I know. I remember thinking, one less thing to worry about because I've done it. And it wasn't that bad. But I did. I really thought that. I thought, all this time I was afraid, what if my death is prolonged and protracted and miserable and painful and ugly and hard? I went to sleep. They gave me a shot of Dilaudid and I passed out and here I am. I
Sounds
wish
like
I'd
a good
known.
deal.
Oh my gosh. And I thought it was kind of funny. I'd worried about it for so long. But yeah, the second I put my hand back down to my side, pretty interested that I was using my right hand to push through that door. Right-handed on earth, right-handed in heaven. But in a millisecond, I was back on that gurney, back in my body. But now there was lots and lots of activity going on all around me. And boy, I don't know the timing, but it seems to me it was very fast that they had me transferred to another gurney and I was in an ambulance heading to a trauma center. And I get criticized for this too, but it's all true. In that ambulance, they load me into the ambulance. First time in my life, well, second time, one day I'd been in an ambulance, but they load me in that ambulance to take me to the trauma center about, I don't know, a few minutes away. And, they have one attendant drive the ambulance and they have another attendant back there with you. And I had an oxygen mask on at this point because, I'd been recently deceased. By the way, I was gone for more than 10 minutes. And the really cool thing about that is you can't do CPR on somebody who's bled to death because all the compressions will actually just push out more blood. So I had 10 minutes with no oxygenation to the brain. And so when they first brought me back, the first thing they said to me, they were right in my face. First thing they said to me, what is your name? Rosemary. What year is it? 2018. Where are you? And I said a crummy excuse for an ER, which was pretty funny.
That was pretty funny.
Just back from the dead, and she's still funny. Anyway, when they loaded me into that ambulance for transport, this enormous angel, spiritual being, whatever, was back there with me. I don't know the logistics of the whole thing, but she kept me company on that whole ride to the hospital and told me very funny stories and little jokes and little asides, and I was cracking up. I couldn't stop laughing. She was talking and telling me so many funny things and just little quips, and I can't remember them. I remember so much about the NDE itself, but not what the angels said to me. But I do remember one, she was funny, funny, funny. She was far funnier than I am. And I thought, how cool that God is so in tune to us that he gives me the angel with a sense of humor.
Right.
And I remember multiple times taking that oxygen mask off my face so I could laugh better because I was, laughing a lot. And that attendant, the human attendant, would come by and he'd snap it back on my face. He finally said, he did say this. He said, Rosemary, that needs to stay on.
Right.
So back at the hospital, I was treated very well. And now they believed me. It's like the tombstone of a hypochondriac. I told you I was sick.
Yes.
And now they really believe I had been bleeding quite a bit. And then the next morning when the doctor came in, he was very helpful. He said, you had a heart attack. I said, not me. I'm in excellent shape. I ride. I ride my bike, I walk, I do my green veggies. And he said, no, 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 it was you. You had a heart attack. And he said, my enzymes and my blood work enzymes had gone way back, way up, and they were already starting to come down. So they knew it was an underlying heart disease. But he said, what happened is last night your heart went into, I think it's VFib, where it just quivers. And he said, and then it stopped. And he said, you lost so much blood. His heart's just a pump. It's kind of amazing. I learned a lot. When you're bleeding out like that, the body cuts off blood to the legs and like the extremities, and it tries to preserve the core. And then it will even cut off blood to like the intestines because it's trying to keep heart, lungs, and brain going. But there comes a time when there's not even enough blood to do that. So anyway, but yes, if there had been a cause of death, it would have been bleeding to death or organ failure. I don't know. But he said, yes. And he said, we suspect there's some damage to your heart because of the enzymes being so elevated. And, I did. In short, he was able to affirm when that first thing I heard was, my heart has stopped. How do I know that? It did. I was right. I had medical proof. So that was pretty darn cool. And one of the things they hauled me off after a couple of days. I think they waited a couple of days to do tests to see if I was really going to survive. I think there was some uncertainty. But they hauled me off for the test and heart test and such. And I said, no, no, we don't need to do those heart tests. Angel said if I agreed to come back, I'd be fine. And with every test, the doctor would come in and say, Mrs. Thornton, you're a very lucky woman. Apparently there's no damage to your heart. Apparently there's no damage here. And apparently this is fine and that is fine. And at one point, I don't remember all the details, but at one point there's a lot of concern about blood clots. Because when you bleed out, what's left gets sticky. Because, your body's saying, something real bad is happening. Let's try and stop this. And there's
Yeah.
a word for it I don't remember. So there's some concern about blood clots and stuff. But at every point in turn, I knew the angels would not bring me this far just to have it all go awry. And I was sent home at 4 days. And I told the doctor, I said, I don't want to go home. When you're in a hospital, at least 3 times a day, they bring you food. I thought that was just magnificent,
Yeah.
and you just hear the cart going down the hallway and they say, Rosemary Thornton. I say, yes. And they say, here's your food. And I was on a liquid diet for most of that time because they were afraid if the bleeding started again, they'd have to do emergency surgery. But there was an expectation. Well, they sent me home at day 4. And I said, I don't want to go home because one, I don't want to bleed to death. I don't want this to happen again. And the doctor told me bluntly, he said, your odds of bleeding to death now are minimal. He said, but your white blood cell count is so low that your odds of contracting an opportunistic infection are great. And he said, if you do contract an infection like MRSA or staph, he said, we won't be able to save you because you're in a pretty compromised state. He said, so it's best for you to go home. And I accepted that. And there was an expectation. He said, now, the red and white blood cells and blood cells and such is formed by your bone marrow. And he said, it's going to take you about 2 to 3 months to fully recuperate from this. So I remember thinking, that's not what the angel said. And actually, I called a friend who'd been praying for me very faithfully. And I said, yeah, George, they're saying it's going to be 2 to 3 months before I can recover and really feel right again. And my friend George said, oh, we'll just see about that. And I love that quote. So 2 weeks out from the event, I had a doctor's appointment. And they sent me in for blood work. And the doctor, when he got the blood work, he said, I see there's a mistake on your blood work. Your numbers are textbook perfect. That's impossible. And I said, no, 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 no. The angel said if I agreed to come back. And I said, plus I'm riding my bike again. And they said, what? I said, yeah, I feel fine. Because when you first come back from this, I mean, the first 2 or 3 days, one, I looked very pale, to say the
Yeah.
least. And secondly, I couldn't walk to the bathroom without fainting and breathing very heavy, like a fish out of water. And I could tell that just kind of suddenly went away. But the funny thing is, there's many funny things, but when you go to your oncologist and he says you're starting chemo in a few days, and you say, well, you know what? Turns out I was healed in heaven. I won't be needing that chemo. They don't always take it in the spirit you intended.
Right. Yeah.
And I ended up having to find another oncologist in a different part of the state. Because it turns out when you're a fairly well-known oncologist, people don't want to go against that diagnosis and say different things. So that was kind of a big deal. But anyway, the second oncologist did a second surgery. She wanted to wait a couple months due to the bleeding. She couldn't get past the I bled to death from a cervical biopsy. She was very concerned about that. I was like, no, 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 let's talk about healed in heaven.
Yeah.
So second surgery was done about 2 months out, and uh, she was pretty incredulous that this cancer had been healed in heaven, and yet I was pretty confident. I felt pretty good about it. Anyway, when she came out of the surgery, again, my friend was waiting for her in the waiting room there at the hospital, and she literally threw her arms around his neck, my friend's neck, and said, "She's right. There's not one cell left. It's gone. Whatever was there is gone." And she said, in fact, and this, I love this quote, "Her flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. I wouldn't believe she ever had cancer were it not for these other tests, other medical tests." So it was a very dramatic healing. And yet the big deal, the great big deal, and it is a great big deal, as soon as I woke up, as soon as I was resuscitated and back on this earth, I knew my soul had been reset. All the guilt, regret, the coulda, woulda, shouldas, the anger, all of it was gone, absolutely wiped away. And when I was home later, I opened my Bible to the 23rd Psalm. I mean, it flopped open, and it was like the line, "He restoreth my soul," was highlighted. And I thought, that's my healing. My soul was restored. And, an interesting aside, people love this, but I had had some arthritis in my wrist. I had a busted shoulder. I had a busted knee for years and years and years. And when I came back from this experience, all of that was healed. It was simply gone. And I had had some high frequency hearing loss as well. And I noticed even in the hospital, I could hear people talking way down the corridor. I could hear sounds like I hadn't heard them in some time. So that was pretty dramatic as well. As my friend in IT says, it's like you got rebooted by the creator. And then when I came back from this, I sold off everything I owned, down to my car, sold my car, took it back to the dealership, sold it back to them, put my house on the market, sold literally in 2 hours. And then I got a slightly used Prius, and I drove 1,000 miles due west to start a new life. And all I wanted was to be around beauty. I craved beauty with my whole soul. I just wanted to see nature and color and flowers and blue sky. I wanted to see things growing in the dirt. There's something very spiritual to me about watching the combines, because I live in a part of the Midwest now where we have these great expanses of land. And there's something very spiritual about watching the combines prepare the field and then seed the field. And then I would go by these farms every day and watching these itty bitty green sprouts pop up out of that dirt and then turn into corn plants, and then watch them grow and grow and grow. And then a summer thunderstorm comes rolling across the field, these 1,000-acre fields, and you can just see all the grain on the tassels on top of the corn waving back and forth in the wind. And that's all I wanted to do was see stuff like that, just to be near beauty. Because that's kind of the thing. I felt like those seedlings. I had been just trounced into the dirt, just trounced. And yet, even in the midst of all that, there's such renewal and such regeneration. And we have a bad habit in this country of thinking once you get to a certain age, it's just decay and deterioration. And I've been reading articles and the Bible, looking at the words renew and regeneration. And I really think in terms of healing, because, there's a lot of wounded souls in the world. I really think in terms of healing, the next great frontier is going to be spiritual healing. Looking at what's going on in our thought, in our head, I really think if I were queen of the world, I would make sure every doctor has at least 15 minutes with every patient. And to sit them down and say, okay, it looks to me like your diet's pretty good. And it looks to me like you're fairly healthy. But now you've got this disease. Tell me what's going on in your life that hurts. Tell me what's broken. But who knows if that's ever going to happen or happen in our lifetimes. But it's a very dramatic experience. And I guess the one takeaway I want people to know is, in the beginning, you talked about the show being about spiritually transformative experiences. We are spiritual beings, and we are capable, even at an advanced age, I was 59 at the time, of dramatic renewals, and renewals in terms of our soul. I mean, really, I think that's kind of molecular level at where healing starts. I really do. And in my own case, I'm so grateful for the physical healing, no doubt about that. But the healing of my soul, that's what changed everything.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was incredibly moving.
Thank you.
And I do want to know, how are you feeling now? How has your soul been healed? I know that grief is a process. I know that you never, as people say, get over it.
You don't. I think now, and that's a great question, another great question. With my husband, um, I was able to let go of the angst, and now I can just grieve the fact that he's not here. And I really am sad about the choices he made. But it's a more manageable type of grief. He's dead. He's gone. I wish I could talk to him a lot. When I injured my back and I was like, I really need my husband right now.
Yeah.
I really need somebody to help me, get up and get a glass of something to drink. Um, but yeah, it took away a lot of that pain of the agonal grief that only other suicide survivors can be familiar with. And that's something you and I talked about briefly before we were on the air was suicide survivors, as we're known, those who have lost somebody very dear to us to suicide, are not well treated by society. We really are the 21st century lepers. As an example, a lot of people don't know this. There's a movie with Samuel Jackson called The Cleaner. Have you ever heard of that movie?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Oh my gosh. It's a little rough around the edges. It's a murder mystery, but it starts out with him as a guy who does biohazard cleanup. And something folks don't understand about losing somebody to suicide, um, you're on your own to clean that up. And you either have to hire somebody or deal with it yourself. And that's one way it's very different than losing somebody to a disease process. And then part two of that is, in so many cases, because not surprisingly, I get a lot of emails. My website's temporarydeath.com, but not surprisingly, I get a lot of emails when um, a wife loses, and I can speak about a wife, but when a wife loses a husband to suicide, the wife is often detained for questioning by the cops. We become the number one suspect in a murder investigation. And it's just so horrible. And I've learned they're not doing that in other countries. Like in Canada, they have an advocate. And the best comparison I can give is in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, if a woman was sexually assaulted, she would be asked, why were you on the street at 2 in the morning? Why were you wearing those stiletto heels? Should you have been wearing that miniskirt? Why were you wearing those stockings? And we're doing that still. I mean, and now we realize that women who've been the victim of an assault like that need an advocate. And the police are good about that. They provide an advocate to help the woman navigate the horrors of that trauma. But we're still doing it to suicide survivors. I mean, I was questioned by the cops. My daughters were questioned by the cops. And I've gotten emails from women whose husbands killed themselves who were detained by the cops, as in put in jail until the cops could figure out what was what. And I'm in a group on social media called Sisterhood of Suicide Survivors, and those women have saved my life. Those women have been fantastic. Because there are still times I get depressed. I get depressed at holidays. I know people like to think that everything is sunshine and rainbows and things are so much better. I'm quite confident I would not have survived the path I was on because all I wanted was to be dead. And it's interesting. God answered those three prayers. God, heal me or let me die. Kind of got both. Help me with the big decisions. I got some help in that decision I made at the door. And then spare me the life review. There was no life review. But that group on social media, Sisterhood of Suicide Survivors, saved my life. But I recognize that my experience is so typical. So if I were queen of the world, if I could figure out a way to create a nonprofit organization, I would love to have a group that provides advocacy to women whose husbands kill themselves. I mean, that's where my heart is. And the other thing is that often these women whose husbands do this, they have children and their breadwinner is dead. And the breadwinner, in my husband's own case, he didn't even leave me the password to his PayPal account. So you're like, well, okay, we got a checking account with this bank. Crap, where's the checkbook? You know? So you often don't have access to resources for a time. So yeah, I'd love to find a way to create a group that says, here's no means testing. Here's $1,000. And there are women in this group that their husbands kill themselves, and it takes a while for government help to arrive. And so they have no money. They have no resources. They have no way to buy what they need for their children. So yeah, it's two things I would love to see happen. One is provide immediate support to women who've lost somebody to suicide, and two, protect them from the cops. I know the cops are doing what they think they need to do, but to question a woman who just found out that her husband killed himself in a violent manner, it's not right. To detain a woman who just found out she's a widow through a very violent means. And by the way, in my experience, the number of women who remain in their homes after their husband does this, their numbers are very small. So we lose our homes. We lose the guy who makes more money than we do. We lose that. We lose our friends. We lose our church. I had been attending a church. This story is in my book, and I almost hate to repeat it, but it happened. They do the altar call at the end of the church service, the Christian church, and they say, come forward if you'd like prayer. And my husband had been a well-known member of the community, and I went forward for prayer after, this was after his suicide. And I'm standing up there with these three elders with their hands on my shoulder, and I said, I need help. I'm sinking under the waves of despair. And they said, one in particular said, what do you need to confess about your marriage? And I said, no. I said, I engaged in petty arguments at times. And she said, well, no. What else do you need to tell us about? And I said, well, at times I guess I was a bit of a shrew. I don't know. What wife doesn't nag from time to time, And then she asked a third time, and I said, okay, this is 4 weeks after he's killed himself. And I said to her, what are we going for here? I should kind of admire myself for even having the presence of mind to ask that. And she said, a man like your husband would not have killed himself without a good reason. And she said, we cannot pray for you effectively until you tell us what's going on. And I said, we're done. And I walked out. And I have never, boy, when they say, do you want us to pray for you? Shoo, it's a trick. And I mean, I know, I shouldn't say, I know in most cases it isn't a trick, but we should be counseling leaders at churches. If a woman comes forward asking for prayer, don't drill down into her and say, confess your sins to us, because your husband certainly had a reason. And I know what they're going for. Were you screwing around on him? I know that I suspect that's what they were going for. It's awful. And I wasn't. Nobody cares about the truth, but I wasn't. But, there are women who make mistakes out there. And if their husband kills himself as a result, it's still not their fault. It is not something I learned. It took a long time to sink in. There is nothing I could have done to make my husband kill himself. And there's nothing I could have done to stop him from killing himself. And yet that is not what society believes. They look to the wife. I went to a suicide, what do they call it? Suicide survivors thing. It's for people like me, lost somebody to suicide. And this woman stood up and she's talking about her son, and oh, it was so awful, and he killed himself. And I don't want to diminish or belittle how awful that is. But then she started in on, my son would still be alive if he hadn't married that bitch.
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, we're done. And I stood up and walked out. So yeah, the spouse just gets it from every angle and every corner. And we need to knock that off. And then you walk into a church and somebody says they'll pray for you and you get confess your sins. The guy who drops dead of a heart attack, his wife isn't belittled like that. And that's the thing. I felt like I was adrift in the Atlantic Ocean in a frozen cold night, clinging to a piece of driftwood, begging for somebody to help me. Somebody save me. Somebody help me. And, you reach out to society and you reach out to your old friends and you reach out to the church and you reach out everywhere. And people are saying, no, thanks, but no. We need to do better than that. And by the way, if we're going to talk about suicide prevention, it's actually a hot button for me. Um, Spouses who have lost somebody have lost their spouse to suicide, men and women who've lost a spouse to suicide, are 12 to 48 times more likely to end their own life.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about suicide prevention, let's go find them and let's go say, we know you're at risk. We're going to help you. Don't even say, what can you do to help? That's too complicated. But we're here to help you. But instead, we treat them like lepers in church, out of church, in everywhere. We just treat them like lepers. And that's what needs to stop. We are a known risk group. And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm tired of hearing about suicide prevention. If we're going to get serious, I'd like to know the stats. Is there any stats that suicide prevention works? I believe it can be effective for young people, maybe under 25. But what's one of the fastest demographics of suicide now is people over 55. So let's look at the people who are at risk. Let's reach out to them. Let's help them.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And because, first of all, as I said, it is Mental Health Awareness Month, which they designate a certain time to let's talk about this. But it's become very important to me over the last, I mean, it's always been something I'm aware of, but really it's hit home very personally of late, having lost a friend as a result of mental illness and have watched other friends who were bipolar have psychotic episodes and end up hospitalized, and no one knows what to do because nobody knows where to put them, or they have to voluntarily they have to agree to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're in a psychotic episode. And so again, I don't know what the answer is, but I think even just talking about it and letting people know what it's like from your perspective, because people have no idea. No one can unless they've been through it. And even then, your experience isn't the same as somebody else's experience. But I do think that so much of the time people brush it under the rug. And even with my own very close friends passing, I've had to come to peace with this was his choice. I mean, he didn't take his life intentionally, but his choice not to receive help for his mental health issues, which we talked about. A lot of men don't want to get help, or they don't feel comfortable opening up, or don't feel comfortable being vulnerable. And so they're not seeking that help. And it's not just men, but I've seen that a lot. And they don't want to share it and they deflect. And a lot of my friends who have mental health issues deflect. I ask how they're doing. No, how are you? They don't want to talk about it. And for whatever, it could be, I think it's a lot of reasons. It's shame. It's, which is why I think talking about it is important. It's shame. And it's also, they don't want to face it. They don't want to lose their autonomy by having to be on drugs or go to a hospital. They're afraid of people finding out. They want to try to, I can manage this. And overall, it's just been very heartbreaking to see so many people that I love, and even people that I just know peripherally, ending up having a hard time knowing where to turn. And then as a person who's watched this happen to her friends, and I have gotten involved when I've noticed something's off, somebody needs to get this person help. Even when I tried to get a friend of mine help, her whole family was like, oh no, I don't want her to get mad, or, and I think we're all just sort of standing there like, I don't know what we're supposed to do, and so I think, but like you said, there's also the element of an adult who chooses to take their life because they're just in too much pain for whatever reason. We can't control their decision. We can't stop them necessarily, but what we can do is be more open to hearing things that we're uncomfortable with. And I don't want to say more compassionate, because I think most people have compassion, but talking about this stuff makes them uncomfortable, or they don't know what to say. And they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. And they do say the wrong thing sometimes, as we discussed. But I think it's so important it sounds so cliche, but to raise awareness about what goes on, because I think that people who are struggling need to feel like they're not going to be ostracized if they come out and say, I really need help, without someone going, that person's crazy, or whatever the case may be. So again, I don't know what the answer is. I just know that there's a helplessness around mental illness. And I say that I mean, anyone who's depressed or has anxiety, it doesn't even have to be bipolar, schizophrenia, or borderline. But the thing is that overall, it is something that's so important to talk about because I'm just watching my friends succumb to this illness and there just doesn't seem to be enough support.
There isn't, and I believe with the with the quarantines and such, I believe it's made the problem exponentially worse.
Yeah.
We don't heal in isolation. You know, we're tribal by nature, and I know that the hardest times of my life are the times when I was the loneliest, and we got to find a way to solve that problem too. I think what is it, over 100 million people right now are single households.
Hmm.
And I know there's an awful lot of inflation and housing costs have been skyrocketing. But I think maybe one of the hidden blessings, I mean, I don't think it's a blessing that inflation's so bad, but I think perhaps a blessing of that is that I know so many stories of people moving in with somebody else. Like I know a young man who moved back in with his parents who are up in years. And I know of two young people who moved in together. You know, so many apartments, if you got 1,600 square feet and a couple bathrooms, it will really work. But in the cases I know where people are sharing living spaces, it solves the problem of loneliness. And as an architectural historian, which is my background, this thing of one person, one house, or one person, one apartment is very foreign. It's not anything we've done. And you know, we had the nuclear family in the 50s and the 60s, and I guess into the 70s. But prior to that, most houses were multi-generational. A young couple would move back into the house where they were living with mom and dad. And mom and dad may have grandma or grandpa living in a back bedroom. It's one of the reasons old houses had, well, they had transoms in interior doors, so you could have ventilation and yet still have privacy. And it's one of the reasons that old houses have multiple exterior doors, so people could come and go with relative privacy. So this thing of one person, one household is not healthy. I don't think it's mentally, spiritually healthy. I really don't. So maybe that's one of the good things that can come out of rising housing costs. But yeah, it's loneliness is a real problem. And
That-
we were talking earlier about social media allegedly is just making it worse.
Absolutely. I mean, in some, excuse me, in some ways it brings us all together, but it's also very divisive. And even just, yeah, I've been talking about this a lot with a lot of my friends where people just feel so free to say the meanest things to one
Oh.
another
Well, and
on
somebody said it's like a highlight reel. You know,
it.
you're sitting at
Yeah.
home and you're not feeling well, or your boyfriend broke up with you, and we're getting married and
Yeah.
everything's just great.
Yeah.
But then if
Yeah.
you put something on, I'm having a bad night, I'm having a bad day, can somebody give me a call? Isn't it time for you to be over this? So,
It's a lot. There's a lot about our society that, like you said, it is sort of making us more divided. And in fact, my rent just went up so astronomically that I was like, I can't afford this. And I've actually thought about, I mean, I'm not going to, we'll see what happens, but I'm like, if it goes up any more, which it will, I'm like, I'll move in with my parents and I don't even mind because I love them. They're my best friends. And that's why I
oh,
moved out to Virginia from LA because I love my parents so much and I missed them. And I also love it out here. But, and look, I'm in my 40s, but I thought I'm single. Obviously, if I get, when I get in a relationship again, we'll shift. But it actually makes sense to me, although I love to be alone. So I'm a little bit of the exception. But I do think there is something to be said for this inner loneliness. And sometimes, no matter how many people you have around you, you can still have that emptiness inside of you. And I think I felt it for most of my life until the last 10 years. I've been actively working on healing my soul and the earthly realm through 12 step, through therapy, through all of these things. In fact, that would be 15 years. And it's also just something that people don't seek therapy a lot of times when there's I don't know why. I think on one hand, you'll see a lot of people everyone's in therapy now, but then there's still people I notice that are struggling, and they just won't do it. And they think, I can handle this. I'm a grown up, I'm a man, I'm whatever, I can handle it. And it's, it's frustrating. As I said, my friend who I lost, I just, he just didn't tell me what he was going through. And we spent a lot of time together and talked every day. And I just, I can't, I can't even be angry with him. And I just said to him the other day, to his spirit, I just said, you lived life on your terms. I wish that you sought help, but you just couldn't be caged. You just had to be a lone wolf and a free spirit. And I understand that. And I have to respect that. But I think that there also needs to be more accessibility to resources. And as I said, I've watched now several friends end up with psychotic episodes, and everyone's just sort of going, am I supposed to intervene? Who do I call? I don't even know who to call. Do I call this person? Do I call that person? Do I call a hospital? Do I call the police? And there's all this fear around, well, if I call the police, are they going to be angry with me, or are they going to treat them poorly, and where are they going to end up? And then we can only hold them for overnight. And then so I just keep getting frustrated with the way this works. Why is it so difficult when somebody is in dire, immediate danger? The best thing we can do is call the police. It's just, there has to, I don't know. I don't know how to fix it, but I do think it's important to talk about. And I thank you so much for sharing that as well. I'm so glad, and so glad that you've found healing and peace. And yet I know it's still very painful. And I know that it does change you.
It does. It's an ongoing process. People are funny. People get to thinking, oh, you're some ascended angel.
Yeah.
What is a bodhisattva? No. I still wear eyeglasses.
Yeah.
I'm still dealing with a backache. I mean, we're all doing our best. And I do wonder many days what exactly am I doing back here? But my hope is in sharing the message, it will give people some peace. And if my coming back serves one purpose, I hope if anybody out there is feeling like, I'm thinking about ending my life, don't. You will be destroying those who love you. They're not going to get over it.
Yeah.
They're never going to forget that day. I mean, still when that month rolls around, I still cry. I cry a lot. And I just wish I could tell people I got healed by my spiritually transformative experience, which is what it was. But don't do this. It just leaves a swath of destruction that words can't describe. And my dog died just a month shy of her 13th birthday. She was a very good dog and a very faithful companion. But after she saw my husband do this, she was a different animal. She changed dramatically. And that's why I have a chapter in my book about Teddy the dog, because I one of the end of the chapter before it says, if you can't think of a single reason to not end your life, at least think about your dog or your cat, because they will never be the same. It's violence. Suicide is violent, and we talk about all the reasons people do it. And yes, there's as many reasons as there are suicide, but it is I have strong feelings. You're murdering yourself, I mean, there's really no way around that. And it's violent, and it's a violent end. And it just leaves like this, well, my daughter calls them energy strands. It leaves behind a mess. Don't do it to people. I don't know. It's frustrating.
Yeah. A friend of mine, actually, when people have asked me, because I'm a medium, do animals have souls? Oh my gosh. Of course, absolutely, they have souls. One of my friends, his wife took her life violently as well. She had this cat, and the cat was a Bengal cat, and they're very smart. They're like dogs. And he said this cat followed her to pee, like sat in her lap while she was on the toilet, followed her everywhere. This cat was so attached. It was a kitten. It was only like a year or two old. When she took her life, he said that cat wailed and wailed and wailed and dropped dead within a short 2 years old. He said to me, that's why I always get Bengals from now on. He has more, but the cat feels the grief and the pain and the trauma of watching that happen. So but there are also people, and I just heard Ashley Judd talking about how she was the one that found her mother. And she's like, I mean, that's trauma you'll never get that out of your mind. So I know life is tough, but in this scheme of things, it feels long while we're here. It feels endless when you're going through something hard. But it's like, but I know from from the perspective of the other side, it's really just, it's the blink of an eye when you're on the other side. And that doesn't mean anything when you're in deep grief and pain. However, it's just trying to remember that as bad as it feels, and I know because I'm a recovering addict and I used to want to take my life all the time. The only thing that constant is change. And now I'm happier than I've ever been. I love my life. I love myself. I'm happy generally most of the time, even when things are a little stressful. And I know there will be losses that will come that will knock me to the ground. But it's also my belief is that you're still going to have to come back and do it again, and whether you're spiritual or not. I mean, you're right. It's hard. I understand. And I have so much compassion for anyone struggling with the pain of being bipolar or in deep grief or who's lost somebody to suicide themselves, which often is what the trigger is, as you said. And I know it feels unbearable, but I just, as you said, want to add that yes, it just causes so much pain and grief to the people left behind, unfathomable grief, and then they're feeling the same way. So, if anything, just reach out to somebody. I've said to some, I said on one of my last episodes, just show up to therapy, a 12-step, even if in that moment you just feel like I can't do this, I can hardly breathe. I remember feeling that way, going to meetings, going, I don't even want to be alive. I don't want to breathe, but I just have to trudge in there and put my butt in the seat and just sit there. And you know what? The more I did that, the better I felt. And I did heal. I did heal. It took a long time, but thank God I stuck around. And I'm also blessed with not having a mental illness. I know that it's easy to say when I'm not dealing with that kind of a mental torment, but it doesn't matter. There's help. There's help, there's support, and you're loved.
Well, what you said about the blink of an eye, that is very true. When I was in that floating away in that blackness, it seemed like my 59 years had been just a moment in time, just such a brief moment. And it also felt like that had been the dream. And I had awakened to spiritual truth. I had awakened to what is genuinely real. And I say that with some caution because, there are some people around us who say, oh, yes, this whole experience is just only a dream. You just need to change your thought and everything will change around you. I actually was on a panel of people who had allegedly spiritually transformative experiences. And some woman called in who had buried a child. And this woman, one of my fellow panelists, said, don't you understand that this whole life is about our thought experiences and you just need to change the way you think about this? And I don't think such things should ever be said. As you just said a second ago, when you're mired in grief, there's no worse pain. Throw in a little guilt. I mean, when somebody loses a child, especially in an accident. I knew a woman who lost her child in a car accident when the mom was driving. You don't need to be telling them that this experience is all about her own thoughts. And if you would only change your thoughts, the experience would change. We just need to be so careful about what we say. And unfortunately, I've met a lot of people through this experience, and some people are just so dismissive of, as you say, the pain of grief. It is real. You can heal. But oh gosh, I love that Willie Nelson song. Allegedly, Willie Nelson encountered a woman who had lost her husband, a friend of his, as I recall the story. And she wasn't doing well getting past the grief. And so he wrote that song, There are some things you can't get over, but you have to get through them. And I think that's right. And what I said was true. I'll never be the Rosemary I was before my husband's suicide. I'm a different person. But, I look for the happiness in the moments. I don't look for happy days anymore. I look for the happiness in like that field of corn that's blowing in the wind. I was sitting on the front porch today just watching the sunset, and a little bunny came right up to my feet and sniffed and, hopped away, a little wild rabbit. I look for moments of happiness in the days, but honestly, I can't say I have happy days, but I can find the happy moments within each day.
And that's gratitude for those little things. Doesn't mean you're not going to feel pain, but it just means that even if for just a moment you can find the presence to be the power of now is something that I'm practicing a lot, I should say. I'm just starting that sentence all over again. It's it's being present to this moment right now. The breeze is on my cheeks. There's a bunny at my feet. I'm watching the corn or the flowers. I'm watching the sun sparkle in the trees. And just, I try to ground myself with that too. Don't stop. Let's get out of the past. Let's get out of the future. Just in this particular moment, I feel comfortable and calm. And there's so much beauty around me. It doesn't mean that I'm ignoring all the bad things that are happening. It means that just in this moment, I have everything I need. And that's something that my 12-step sponsor reminded me of. Even though I was in agonizing emotional pain, she said, I don't know how she worded it, but it was, right now, you have everything you need. You have life, you have breath, you have a roof over your head, you are fed. You are complete, you have everything you need. And that's, I tell that to other people. We think, when we're in our pain, it's so hard to think of anything else. And it's just, yes, this hurts. I try to be present with my pain and say, okay, let's analyze the pain. What does it feel like? Where is it coming from? Is it in my chest? Is it in my stomach? Is it going to kill me? No, it feels really uncomfortable. It feels really uncomfortable, but it's not fatal. I think sometimes just breaking it down to smaller parts. Like, hey, wow, this really hurts. And just being able to go, oh man, this is painful, and kind of talk about it. For me, that's something that really helps. And I just want to thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing your whole story, which is just fascinating, which is why I ask you to go all the way back to the beginning, because as you said, that I wouldn't have gotten that nugget about the angels, you hearing voices. That's why I go back, because in my experience, almost everyone I know that's had a near-death experience, not everyone, there were hints before that something big was happening spiritually for them. They were already sort of connected with spirit. They were old souls. They already sort of knew they'd had a near-death experience before. They became aware of, as your father saying, you can communicate telepathically. You actually can. So I think it's really interesting to see how the evolution. And my last question for you is just going to be, do you see an order to the way that things have unfolded from the perspective of the other side, your soul's purpose? Do you see a pattern, or do you feel that there's some sort of, I don't know if I want to say like, did all this happen for a reason, but do you know what I'm saying? It's sort of like, was there sort of a pattern, and what have you observed from the spiritual perspective in terms of, I mean, you just got bombarded with stuff. Like, I can understand why you just went, I'm out. I mean, come on. Like, are you kidding me? Now I have cancer on top. Get out of here. Like, what is this? Do you think that there was a reason for it all, or a pattern, or do you think it's just stuff that happened?
Honestly, I think it's some of both. You remember the book, Rhonda Byrne's book, The Secret, that was this
Yes.
huge bestseller?
Yeah.
I read a review at Amazon that I think was spot on, because Rhonda Byrne, whatever, she took the position in that book that everything that happens in our life is something we thought into existence. And there's a old quote, I think it's William Shakespeare, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And that was kind of the premise of the book in some ways. And maybe that's not a fair synopsis, but
Interesting.
that's wrong. There are things that are just bad. Genocide, rape, infanticide, the Holocaust. There are some things that are just bad. And you
Yeah.
can't say that thinking will change that.
Right.
And if your thinking will change a genocide into a good thing, your thinking is messed up.
Right.
So, a reviewer of that book, The Secret, said, "Yes, our thoughts can be responsible for some of what comes into our life." And Jesus said, "Bring into captivity," or no, it was Paul said, bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." That's a really big order. Bring into captivity every thought. So yes, I think we have to be responsible for our thoughts. Just like, when somebody cuts in front of you very rudely in traffic, I think our human default is to say expletives, to curse them, to say ugly things. But the right thing is to say, I don't know what happened to them today. Maybe this is the day they found out that their daughter has a disease, or who
Mhm.
knows? And maybe they're just a crabby person. But we really need to respond. Again, back to what I talked about at the beginning. St. John the disciple said, little children love one another. We're just supposed to be kind and good to each other. So anyway, the Rhonda Byrne book, this reviewer that I just love said, yes, we do have to be careful about our thoughts, but sometimes crap just happens. And the
Mhm.
people who say you signed a spiritual contract to come here and experience the horrors of paternal abandonment, followed by a marriage of 24 years that came to a screeching halt, followed by a second husband that I really believed was the love of my life, and he kills himself. I'd be a sadist to sign up for that.
Right.
I I believe that, yes, I do believe in pre-existence. We were obviously somewhere before we came here.
Yeah.
As you were just talking about animals, they have souls. We have souls. We were somewhere before and we're going to be somewhere after. But to say that we sign up for this stuff, I can't buy into it. So I think some of it is stuff that just happens.
Mhm.
And I think it's just victim blaming to say, well, you must have signed up for this. You must have agreed to take all this on. Again, it's the way people feel better about trauma not being in their own life. They can say, well, I'm doing this thing right. So this thing that
Right.
happened to her isn't going to happen to me.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Well, thank you again for your time and your energy, your vulnerability, and for sharing your story. So I know you've shared your story so many times, and it means so much because some people may have already seen your story, but there's still so many who haven't. And I would really encourage everyone to read your book. I pulled it up, please, and we will put a yes, yes. Remembering the light, and we will put a I will put I will put a little, I'll put information about where to find you in the description.
That'd be great.
But thank you again. It's just been such a pleasure, and so it's such an honor
Oh,
to be
thank
able to
you.
sit in the presence of you as you tell your story. First,
Mhm.
hearing it firsthand just means a lot to me as well. So,
Thank you so much.
bless you, and I wish you continued healing, abundance, good health, all of the good things, because man, you you deserve a break, sister.
Well, thank you very much. I concur.
Yes.
I'm ready for the smooth sailing.
It's your time, girl.
It is. Absolutely.
All right, well, you take care, and we will speak soon.
That sounds great. Thank you.